Marco Papiak, Chief Strategist with BCA Research. Marco, thank you for joining us. If you have to explain it to our viewers, which way the tariff negotiations are moving, how would you describe that? Confused, nothing happening there, or we are in for a shocker?
No, I don't think either of those three. I'm actually quite optimistic. I mean, President Trump keeps delaying the implementation of tariffs, which is a positive. He's clearly negotiating. Remember the situation on April 3rd, after the April 2nd announcement. I mean, many of us were even wondering if the negotiations were the point or whether the reciprocal tariffs were supposed to just remain there. So I think the fact that the implementation date keeps moving and the fact that only 14 countries received those letters, those are all positives from the market's perspective.
Okay. Given that we already have what could be called as a tariff rate for Japan, China, and some other countries, and there seems to be a big departure in what was announced or indicated in the month of April versus where numbers are today in the month of July, do you see the final implementation could be much more diluted?
Yes, absolutely. I fully expect both Japan and South Korea to ultimately produce deals. I expect fully that President Trump will announce an absolute victory and the greatest deals ever done. And that when we actually look at the numbers, we'll say, okay, you know, they're marginally positive deals. They're not what we would call traditional trade deals. These aren't the kind of free trade agreements that take years to negotiate, but they'll all be relatively positive from a marginal perspective. Now, I do think that some country, whether it's Japan, South Korea, may have to have tariffs slapped on them. In other words, they may blow through the August deadline, and actually there could be a period where tariffs substantively increase. You know, President Trump may require one or two sort of victims to prove that he is tough, but even in that case, I wouldn't be that negative. Ultimately, for me, what's really positive for the market is that somehow Europe and China, you know, the two greatest trade partners of the US, aside from Mexico and Canada, have escaped this secondary round of tariffs. And actually, negotiations seem to be moving in a very positive direction. And that's very good and positive surprise.
Okay, positive so far when it comes to tariffs, but Peter Mcguire as well joins in on the show right now. Peter, not so great for copper though. I mean, almost double of what the consensus view was. It's a 50% tariff now. How does that go down?
Yeah, Isha, I mean, you know, we only have to look at the market and the impact that it's had. Naturally, COMEX record highs. You saw that, I think, surge as far as price. You're running at about $5.50 a pound in Shanghai now. So the overall momentum is certainly going to, I think, going to be higher prices from here. And it's, you know, the early part of the, I think, the absorption to the marketplace, where it trends. We know that copper demand is going to be very, very strong for the rest of this decade and into the next decade. From data centers, of course, construction, you're looking at automobiles, consumer electronics. The overall demand is going to be, I think, massive. And that's where President Trump, naturally, with the likes of Chile, Mexico, and Canada, as far as importing from. So I'm very conscious as far as his, I think, appetite, and is it only going to be 50%, or is he going to hit other metals as well?
But what is the playbook like for metals then? I mean, if he's going to hit other metal, or if the tariff is going to go higher on other metals, then indirectly it's the American consumer who will have to pay more. So how do you see the playbook moving?
Well, that's the issue. That's the issue, isn't it, Nikunj? I mean, how do you go as far as consumption, what the end cost is going to be naturally to the consumer, and how that's all going to be impacted naturally to an inflation story and overall, you know, consumption. So we've just got to work through this. I'm sure that he's got his focus very much on rare earths and rare minerals as well. It'll be the next one off the cab, and the next cab off the rank. And again, we've just got to see how this all works through for the rest of Q3 into Q4. Howard Lutnick's come out and said he certainly wants this in place by end of month or by the 1st of August as far as for those levies or tariffs to be introduced. So they're not sitting on their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Marco, I want to talk about, you know, specific sectors and particularly on pharmaceuticals. The fact that Trump said that he will be announcing pharma and semiconductor tariffs soon, that's really going to sort of impact the global, you know, trade, if you will. and he's threatened 200% on pharma. Do you think it's an eventuality, and would it really happen? Because there's been a lot of back and forth on what he plans to do with pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so the tariffs on copper don't really make sense to me, and maybe someone can explain this, but that's just going to raise prices to consumers. I don't see somehow like a return to 19th century, copper mining in the United States of America. Good luck with that. But pharma does make sense. Why? Because clearly American pharmaceutical corporations, this isn't really foreign, it's American. They've all basically moved to Ireland. And so Ireland has this very interesting situation where it's basically the fifth largest trade surplus with the US. Tiny Ireland, bigger than Canada's trade balance with the US. That is purely a product of tax sheltering by American corporates in Ireland. So I do expect that to definitely happen. I think that's going to be terrible for the US pharmaceutical companies. It's going to be negative for Ireland, but is it really going to redraw global supply chains? I don't think so. This is a specific tax shelter move by US corporates that has created this unnatural dynamic between tiny island of Ireland and the United States of America. It's also a huge part of America's trade imbalance. So by targeting pharma, President Trump does go after a specific sector that is sticking out like a sore thumb, and ultimately is going to hurt one country and American pharma sector. So it's not really something that I think is a macro event. It's more of a sectoral play in the US, and you should definitely be underweight US pharmaceuticals because of this.
Right. Okay. Marco, great to have you on the show. Peter, hang in there. We're going to discuss more on copper and, which way commodities are headed. In fact, I'm going to welcome on board Anindya Banerjee as well, Senior VP, Head of Currency and Commodity Research at Kotak Securities. Anindya, hi. Tell me, what does the move on copper and the tariffs levied as high as 50% really mean for copper prices here in India? And will supply of copper into other markets, including US, surge now?
Something interesting was happening in the copper market, that LME and SHFE, the Shanghai market, was actually bleeding copper out of their warehouses, and all the copper was accumulating in COMEX. So traders were actually anticipating such a move. So they have already front run this. And as far as the global demand and supply is concerned, not much has really changed. It's not that suddenly there is a supply choke point and the demand has surged. But this is primarily a tariff play, which is going to create what it has done is actually the American copper prices are going to be at a substantial premium to what the copper prices are internationally. As far as the Indian market is concerned, if I take MCX as a reference point, of course, it won't be as pricey as where the COMEX is trading, but it will definitely tick higher because a lot of the copper is going to get sucked into the US market because the market is anticipating that this tariff will be levied after a month. So still there is room for a lot of copper to get in and capture this arbitrage.
Peter, let's understand, the copper or copper mines are in South America. They are in China. Now, if tariff is imposed, who will win?
Well, Nikunj, the tariff, as far as President Trump's concerned, he's increasing these tariffs to from a revenue standpoint. So he's got one agenda, and that is to raise revenue for America. And that's the lens that he looks through, and Howard Lutnick. As far as the suppliers, this is going to have some impact, naturally, one, to the consumer, and secondly, whether they take on board those additional costs as far as tariffs, and they absorb them. And that's something that I think any CEO or CFO has got to work through at the moment. Are they going to be competitive if they don't add those to their product, or if they do add it to the product? And that comes down to, I think, a pricing mechanism. So it comes down to your as far as the performance of the corporation, and they're all internal metrics that need to be considered from a business perspective. So, that's something that needs to be very much worked through, I think, again, over the next quarter or two, how that's going to be absorbed and how it's going to be, I think, appreciated from the marketplace.
I'm just going to mark So, Peter, my final question to you is that if international prices of copper will go higher, then copper prices should go up or down? I'm
I would
talking
think
about
they'd
spot
go up.
market here.
Yes, I think they go up, and I think that that's been demonstrated by, first off, the front running, as our other guest has mentioned. Front running over the last couple of months has been very evident, but the overall theme, you've seen that big spike in COMEX overnight, and there's no doubt a market that's up, 15-20%. It's had a little bit of a pullback in Asia trade, but the overall theme is going to be, I think, higher prices. And that's going to be, I want to see how the LME trades over the next probably 2 sessions, currently at about 97, 9,800 a metric ton, whether it's going to crack, 10.5 or 11,000. So we've just got to work through this and see the impact it's going to be, I think, appreciated from the LME and naturally on the COMEX futures.
Anindya, Trump had in Feb also this year ordered a probe into US copper imports, which led to an increase in the sale of copper into the US in recent months. How do you infer this, and how much of this news you think is already in the price?
It was widely anticipated, as I was saying, because if somebody tracked the tariff, the inventory movement, the inventory movement was extremely unusual. Means you had two major exchanges, LME and Shanghai, who was bleeding copper. It meant that as if that the demand for copper had gone up. That's not the case. And the the COMEX, the warehouses were increasingly seeing huge deliveries of copper. So the market was anticipating this, especially after the aluminium tariffs and the steel tariffs. But again, as I said, what will be the impact on the end user demand? See, for America, it has to have a negative impact because all these higher tariffs will have to come out from the pocket of the American consumer because it's like a tax, and they don't have the kind of the alternative supplies domestically which can replenish this. So of course it will be like a tax. It can have eventually a negative impact on demand. So yeah, it was anticipated. So the reaction as far as today is concerned, we might see an upside in copper prices, which we are seeing in Asia, but it's not going to be something dramatic.
All right, gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.